Well, I think first off is the way we have politicized everything in the country, including politics itself. Insecurity, sadly, is also politicized. Um, Before the comment by the governor of Katsina State, there has been this call also by the governor of Benue State, like you have rightly pointed out, and also I think the OV of Abraka Kingdom in Delta State, who is also a retired, I think, Air Vice Marshal also, that had called several occasions whether citizens would be allowed to bear arms. But what does this tell you? It tells you about the break in the system, the complete break in the system. This is not the first time that this conversation is coming up. I think for the past 8 years or more, this has been a recurring conversation in Nigeria. But what does that tell you? Governance is a problem. Government is suddenly trying to abdicate its own responsibility, which takes us back to the Constitution. If you look at Section 14 of the Constitution, talks about the welfare and security of citizens should be the responsibility, the primary responsibility of government. And also, the argument for bearing arms, if you go to also Section 33 of the Constitution, it talks about self-defense, where people can reasonably defend themselves against unlawful violence or attack on their properties. But then there is also a challenge, a big lacuna, because if you think about the Firearm Act, it regulates who should bear arms in the country. So if you want to begin to talk about bearing arms, you then have to go and begin to address all those issues of legislation. But before, how did we get there should even be the fundamental questions. There are times in this country where you will sleep with your doors open. Now we are even in a dire situation where you cannot even travel within states in this country. A shortest distance that I can think of here is from here to Kaduna. Some 10 years ago, I did my MSc at the ABU's area. I travel on Fridays, come back sometimes on Saturdays, or even as late as it is on Saturday, I return back to Abuja. I can't try that now. For most of us that have been affected by it, I was personally also affected because 2019, I had a friend that was supposed to get married on the 20th of April, and he was shot at on the Kaduna Highway on the 1st of April. That shattered the whole plans for the wedding. For 3 years, we were doing back and forth at the hospital with this friend. So for all of us that have suffered personal losses based on this, of course, we all go with the idea of citizens should be allowed to bear, especially because we think the government is not doing enough to protect our lives and our properties. But then also, we need to also think about the cost of doing this, especially because you have a lot of incidences of, we have seen a lot of, even for people that the law allows them to bear, and we have seen how they have misused those opportunities. We have had cases of a lot of cases of accidental discharge, for instance, by even the security. And then by the time you allow citizens to bear arms, how do you control that? The fear is also that will arise that mutual suspicion among citizens, and then which may not also be healthy, in the sense that, we also have beginning to see this fragmentation a lot along different lines, and by the time you empower citizens to truly bear arms, then I think it might be out of control, especially for the government that is truly struggling.
It's good that you spoke about the fragmentations in different arms, because it's hard to have this conversation without bringing in the calls for state policing. And over the last 2-3 years, especially the last 2 years, Nigerians and the state governors have called for state policing, to the point that we saw a situation in Lagos State last week where there was an altercation between the governor and a chief superintendent of police. And interestingly, there's a backstory to that. But the fact that the chief security officer of a state can't give out orders to a police officer. On one hand, it means there may be a semblance of rule of law because the police should take their instructions from above, as was stated. But the point is, Do you feel that the reason why state governors are now can suggest that people should be able to bear arms to defend themselves is because the cries for state policing is falling on deaf ears? The president in his interview last week on Channels TV pretty much said state policing is not an option. So, and you've mentioned this, but speak more on how this is the governors now shifting their primary responsibilities to the people. Is it also as a result of this fragmentation between the executive and the states and the executive and other arms of government?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, if you also look at it truly, Nigeria is not practicing true federalism. I think we are still practicing the parliamentary system of government where somebody dish out all the orders. It is sad that you have the chief executive officers in their state where for every Nigerian, you would think they are responsible or in charge of the security in their own states, but these people are also handicapped. What happened in Lagos is also a demonstration that what had happened some 12 or 18 months back, if you remember the answers, was truly what a lot are suspected that may have some connection with others from above, quote and unquote, because at some point the governor was also saying he was handicapped, and we have seen that also in the events of the last 2 days. But then, again, that is why for me, I think it is very timely that also people are calling for this state policing. Even without that, we are beginning to see some sort of people even providing their own private security. Think about the civilian JTF, for instance, in the northeast. We saw how, we saw how important role they play, especially in helping to quell the insecurity in Borno State. They serve as informants. To some extent also they took the fight to the battlefield. Think also about what is happening in other states. The East already have their own Eastern security network. Not in the Southwest, we also have the Amotekun. So almost every part of the country is trying to come up with some sort of security. Even for the private citizens, now people are hiring people as their bodyguards, as their own private security. What does that tell you? That is the first point I had mentioned, that there is a fundamental problem with the government that the government needs to fix. Now, this is also the biggest fear I have about all of this is about confidence. By the time people begin to lose confidence in governance, then of course you can't control the insurrection that may come as a fallout of this. Now, I'm also most concerned about, of course, my top is elections.
Yes.
We are already in the election year. And now you cannot guarantee that we will comfortably say we'll have elections in all the 36 states of the country because of these cases of insecurity. Beyond the election also is the issues around governance, the issues around development. If people don't feel comfortable to go out to the farms, for instance, to work, because of course you mentioned the Channels interview. For the present, everything is about going back to the farm. If I don't feel secure to go back to the farm, of course, there will be food crisis also in this country. So we need to fix the fundamental problem. And the biggest monster there is fixing the security challenges of the country and not to be shifting blames.
Talking about security challenges, I had a conversation with a friend who was in the southeast part of Nigeria this Christmas. And in the person's words, it looks like a tough security situation because citizens are in their state and they have people who instruct them on stay home orders, and so on some days some people come and say no one should move around, and this is even without state policing being in power. Now, if we have state policing, this now gives the state governors a lot of power, especially in an election year. And then how do we manage the excesses of the average Nigerian who already has his or her own frustrations? Then you give them the right to arm themselves in an already growing insecure country. Shouldn't we actually be more vocal about building our security infrastructure as opposed to asking people to arm themselves?
Oh yeah, of course. I think the cheapest thing to do is to think about building the security architecture. But then, like I had stated earlier, the challenge is even that process is politicized. Think about the issue of security votes, for instance. Almost every state in this country gets some subvention from the government in terms of security votes. I heard it's something that is not even accounted for.
Yes.
Yeah, so by the time you begin to open up holes there, begin to audit that, perhaps it will bring some sanity in the process. Now, even for the security itself, the security agencies themselves, think about their welfare. Think about even training for them. One of the issues from the NSAS protest, for instance, was even about the welfare of the security, was even about their own security. What has the government done in the last 2 years since that protest? So you have not even seen that political will on the part of the government to drive that needed change. I was in the Southeast I worked in the Southeast rather between September and November for the Anambra election, and I can tell you it was an eyesore. For instance, I mean, it crippled a lot of things, economy. Yeah, I mean, for us as civil society, for instance, even affected our activities there. There was a time we were supposed to have engagement with the traditional rulers in one of the states. On the morning of the event, it was cancelled because, of course, the boys will not allow them travel from their communities to come to the center for the meeting. This is how powerful these groups are. And of course, if people feel comfortable that these people can provide them the sort of security that the government is not providing to them, they will yield to whatever is the demands of these people. And I fear that if you see also the effect of this, even on participation in election, only 10% of voters participated in an Anambra election. If you think about the political economy of this, the costs that go into preparing for the election, if this is not addressed, I fear that it's also going to be the same thing for 2023.
I do agree with you that the participation in the Anambra election was abysmal, especially with all the calls for change in the system and the need for development. About 10% was just disastrous. But on a final note, the president on the 31st signed the 2022 Appropriation Act and the 2022 budget. And in his remarks, he stated his concerns about some reductions and some 6,000 projects added to the budget by the National Assembly. But the focus on this is 15 billion naira of non-regular allowance for the Nigerian police force was reduced from that budget, and another 5 billion naira from non-regular allowance from the Nigerian Navy. But the president signed this budget into law, saying some of this would be revisited. The National Assembly, we're the ones who reduced the 15 billion and 5 billion respectively. What message does that pass when it talks about political will of both the executive and the legislative arm when it comes to securing the state and the people?
What message exactly does it pass when you talk about even commitment towards providing security? I think it was also in December also that the president also did some increase the allowances of, I think, the police. And then within the same window also you are doing reduction from the budget. So for me, it doesn't show that commitment that the government is truly ready to fix the security challenges of this country. And that is also, again, because some people benefit from the climate of insecurity. We are beginning to see that encouraged even in the election. In the build-up of elections, beginning from about 2-3 governorship elections that I participated in, you see the pre-election period is overheated. The polity will be so overheated that you think there won't be election. That is because that is how they draw attention and then get whatever they want from the government. So we need to fix that fundamental issue first, and then the people also need to be aware that these are gimmicks that these politicians use first to continue in the climate of corruption, to continue to also instill fear in the people so people don't get to ask questions or don't get to participate in the process. And for election, it is where you don't go to vote that they go to manipulate election results. So people need to begin to understand this and begin to ask the right questions, especially when the politicians come back to us for their campaigns. I think top on the list, top on every person's budget list will be, tell us how are you going to fix the fundamental security challenges that we are experiencing.
Paul, thank you so much for this. And as Nigerians, it's the role of our elected representatives, the president and the state governors, to secure lives and properties in the state, primarily before it comes to the traditional rulers and the people. But it's also important that all the arms of government come together to ensure the security is a priority. That's all we can take on the lifestyle segment. We'll take a quick break, and when we return, more on the weekend show. Don't go away.